We're recording, we're not live. All right. We are live, I think.
See?
Yeah, it's just loading right now.
Okay. All right. Welcome to what is going to be an exciting week as we are kicking off the Stampede. Once again, is that the third year?
Fourth year.
Fourth year. Losing track of the years. This is fourth year for the Stampede. And this select committee, which began as a task force on blockchain, is now here as a permanent statutory select committee. So that's pretty exciting for us because we get to continue the great work that we started many years ago. Before we call roll, Mark, Senator.
A bit of logistics for everyone. The microphones, as we're streaming, are actually in the ceiling and built into the room. So shuffling of paper, side conversations, all of those types of things, whether they're by the committee or by the good folks that are joining us out here in the room, may well be heard and streamed live. So give some thought to what those conversations include and any comments on the side that you might have. If you do want to have a conversation, obviously just pop out and come on back in. Please don't feel uncomfortable about that at any point during our testimony. If you want to provide public testimony at any point during any of these presentations in Wyoming Legislature and certainly in the Select Committee, we welcome that. We'll offer the opportunity for public comment on any topic that we discuss. In this Select Committee in particular, we rely on that public comment for our information, for our understanding of what stakeholders and people that are practitioners in the field are experiencing and what their needs are. So we want that to take place. And if you do want to provide that public testimony and haven't already signed up, we have a sign-up sheet right over there by the door, and we would welcome that for any of the topics. And we'll provide that call to hear from you as we get through those points. University of Wyoming has an indoor masking policy, so please mask whenever you can to the greatest degree that you can and protect our students in the university so we can stay open. I'm a professor here. I did not enjoy teaching online. I want to continue to teach in person. Masking is good for that, and it keeps all of our students in the classroom where I think they belong. Mr. Chairman, back to you.
Thank you. I think that covers all of our introductions. So we'll do a roll call now.
Senator Berkey,
Here.
Senator Cox,
Here.
Senator Nethercott, here. Representative Stitt,
Here.
Representative Western,
Here.
Representative Yin,
Here.
Mr. Kaufman,
Here.
Ms. Long, here, and Mr. Rowe.
Here.
Co-Chairman Rothfuss
Here.
and Chairman also.
Here.
All right, everyone's.
All right. Ms. Long, would you like to give an introduction on the Stampede and what's going on?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stampede is in its fourth year, and last year it was all virtual. This year it is hybrid. So we have a number of you in person. It's really great to see how many folks are here attending the Select Committee meeting, which is one of the many parallel events. There are a couple of startup challenges that are happening. There is a business conference again this year. There is a law conference again this year. And then of course a developer conference. And there are continuing education credits available for various conferences. Most of the conference activity is going to be on Thursday. Then Friday starts the hackathon itself. We have a record number of sponsors that have stepped up to provide sponsorship dollars as well as challenges for developers. This event way out boxes our weight class, so to speak, because it's a small state and a small venue, but it is on par with some of the biggest hackathons in terms of the bounties that are available for developers to compete. We have Senator Lummis coming on Friday night. We have Governor Gordon on Saturday morning, and then a whole host of luminaries from various protocols. Senator Lummis and Marshall Long and I are sort of the Bitcoiners, if you will. We have one of the co-founders of Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin. We also have, which is the second largest protocol, the third largest protocol by market value is right now Cardano, and we have the founder of that, Charles Hoskinson, who's here, who's also going to be running a parallel event. One of the things that tells you you've actually arrived as an event is when people start running parallel events to bring even more people in. And so that's happening this year for really the first time. Last year we had 4,400 unique participants on the online event. From I think 96 countries. I may be mistaken on the exact details, but it was truly a global event. And this year, by doing it hybrid, I think we'll probably have even more, especially given that DAO Day, where Vitalik Buterin, the co-founder of Ethereum, is speaking. DAO Day is Friday, and Vitalik's going to have some pretty important remarks on governance of DAOs, which are, for those of you who are not familiar, decentralized autonomous organizations. Lastly, I would say every year we've attracted some very, very important people in this sector, and every year it's a different group. This year, I think if you go out to Breeze Field and look at the number of private jets that are flying in for this event, it'll speak volumes about what has happened in our little industry. Every year there's been a couple of them, but I think there's going to be more than a couple of them this year. And I'll close by saying some of the biggest Bitcoin miners are coming here, and there will be an announcement. I'll hold back on what it is, but the University of Wyoming is going to be a big beneficiary of some projects that the Bitcoin mining industry is providing. And we're making a big push as a state to set up mining capabilities here in Wyoming. It fits really well with our energy history. We haven't had the lowest cost electricity, but we're starting to become competitive because of some of the other important benefits that Wyoming has to the mining industry. Mr. Chairman, back to you.
Thank you. Phenomenal update, and absolutely exciting to see item number 6 on our agenda, which is cryptocurrency mining. And Ms. Long, it's only been a little tiny piece of everything we've done over the years. We really haven't delved into the grassroots. It's squarely with the part of Mr. Coach.
I think we'll get started on the agenda. I did have one more logistical consideration that came to mind as I was drinking my coffee, which is the nearest coffee, since the coffee shop on the first floor is closed, is immediately across in the Union. If you walk in the Union's closest door, you are at a coffee shop. So that's your handy resource for those that are as concerned about it as I was.
That's an important announcement.
It is. Everyone out there was thinking it. No one was saying it.
All right. So we're going to move to general blockchain updates. This is where we get a general update from various stakeholders. In this case, we're going to be getting some updates from some national stakeholders. This helps us understand exactly what's happened over the last year in terms of usually states that are copying our laws, but maybe we'll get a little more from the national update. So we'll start with Mr. Chris Land, General Counsel for Senator Cynthia Lummis, and he's going to join us in the virtual world.
I see.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Good to see you again.
Do you want to come and sit in front of us, Mr. Lindholm?
I don't see why you shouldn't. Co-chairman, good former Representative Lindholm was instrumental in everything we're doing today, so we appreciate having him with us once again. He's always with us, and look forward to hearing the update of the national from him.
Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna play second fiddle to Mr. Land this morning. Yeah, as we all do.
No, Tyler, I was going to suggest that I do the same, but yeah. Anyways, Mr. Chairman, Tyler, it's good to be here. I'm really excited to be here before you guys. Some quick updates. There's a lot of attention on digital assets right now and distributed ledger technology in Washington, D.C. The new regulators that are getting appointed to the federal financial agencies are all, very savvy in digital assets, and it's definitely kind of in their highest priority of topics that they'll be dealing with in their tenure. Talking about the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the SEC, the Fed, and the FDIC. There's a lot of attention on crypto right now, and a lot of legislative interest, especially in Congress. We're going to be introducing a piece of legislation with Senator Sinema's office in fairly short order, and then a larger bill will be introduced. That kind of comprehensively regulates the digital asset industry. I think in the coming months by us. The regulators are all still kind of in study mode, and they've indicated they want guidance from Congress about how to deal with digital assets. So we're going to try to provide them with that guidance. And there's a lot of regulatory enforcement actions going down at like the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network with BSA AML issues. And so, some of the bad actors in this space are kind of getting nervous. As they should. And, the good actors, we're trying to, spotlight them and, share best practices with the rest of the industry. So it's kind of a crazy time to be in Washington, D.C. working on this, but it's fun, and we're making a difference, and Wyoming's leading the way. We're certainly going to continue to spotlight and promote what Wyoming's done, especially with the Special Purpose Depository Institution, our DAO laws, our money transmission, and digital asset custody laws that the legislature had the foresight to create. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tyler. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Wendell.
Mr. Chairman, one of the important aspects that I want to highlight is that Mr. Lamp is absolutely correct. Some pretty robust legislation is on its way from Senator Lummis, and it's something that herself and her team, Chris and I, have been working on over the last several months in regards to the future of crypto and what it looks like on the federal level. That being said, because there's a lot of people in this room, and perhaps a lot of people listening in, anytime we hear the terms regulation, it kind of it worries us, especially on the federal level, with some of the statements that have come out recently from those like Senator Warren, that tilts one direction that perhaps would not be friendly to Wyoming's cause. In that regard, Senator Lummis's right off the get-go, her stance has been, her biggest goal has been, we need to educate the U.S. Senate about what this industry is actually doing and how they can be a friend and how they can be a good corporate citizen here in the United States instead of running them overseas, which has been our consistent methodology by ignoring them over the last several years. Also on that note, Senator Lummis's legislation, as it comes out, you'll note a very strong point throughout that it does respect states' rights and respects the state's choice to make poor decisions or good decisions. Because of states like New York, we have New Yorkers in Wyoming right now attending this meeting. So we think that's an important aspect or attribute of New York, is to be able to make those mistakes so that Wyoming can hopefully capitalize on their success in running people out of their state. That being said, Mr. Chairman, I do think it's important to highlight the Financial Innovation Caucus, which Senator Lummis co-founded with Senator Kirsten Sinema, who's her Democrat colleague in the U.S. Senate. Her goal was to keep things very bipartisan and keep the partisan politics out of this space, because we've been successful at doing that right here in the state of Wyoming. Even though the Democrat caucus is a very small one, they've led from the front in this space, and so it's important to keep that collaboration together. And Senator Lummis made it a priority with the Financial Innovation Caucus.
Excellent. Questions, committee? Representative Wester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lindholm and Mr. Land, obviously I know it's legislation still in the works. You probably can't go too in depth on it, but I was wondering if maybe you could just provide us with a brief overview of what that regulation looks like or what the legislation looks like at a broad level, if that would be okay.
Definitions. Mr. Chairman. Definitions are our mother's milk, and that's specifically what, and Chris, step in anytime, but specifically what we're looking at right from the get-go is definitions. That's what a lot of these federal agencies are looking for. And we believe by providing that correct guidance in regards to definitions, we can set the roadway for these federal agencies so that they don't spill over in areas that they're not welcome.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lindholm, Mr. Land, is there any chance that some of those definitions might perhaps mirror some of the definitions that were in Senate File 125 of the Wyoming General Session in 2019?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Western. Yeah, I think they'll be fairly close to what's in Wyoming law. You know, I kind of start with Wyoming law and, you know, everything we're doing here. And this just the starting point in everything we do in this space here.
What's that?
That's a slow clap start.
But Mr. Chairman, with your permission, you know, I also think stuff like the consumer protection provisions in Senate File 125 will make a reappearance. Our digital asset custody laws, all that will make a reappearance too.
We're not receiving any royalties off of
Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, no. I would have a house on a Caribbean island if we were receiving oil.
Yes, you would.
All right. Mr. Chairman,
Yes, please, Mr. Co-Chairman.
I wanted to see if there's any update or any further information on our special purpose depository institutions and their relationship between the applications at the federal level and what we're trying to accomplish here. Are we hearing any news? Are we making progress? What is the current situation?
I guess, Mr. Chairman, as way of background, before Mr. Land jumps in, just so everybody on the stream and in the room understands how that process works. As a way of background, the state of Wyoming, I think it was in 2019, passed a special purpose depository institution charter, which is 100% reserve bank charter that also has the ability to reject the FDIC. Those are the high points, but definitely not the only points of this legislation that's important. When that passed into law, there was several interested entities, and since then, 4 entities have gone through the complete chartering process in the state of Wyoming and received the go-ahead from our state banking board. In order for them to complete a lot of their process, they have to be able to obtain certain aspects. The only point. They have to be able to obtain certain aspects. One of them would be approval from the Federal Reserve to be able to access the federal payment system. Another big hurdle would be receiving their routing number. All banks have to receive their routing number. By way of note, because it's not something that we would normally think about, is where does one get one's routing number? ABA routing number, right? What does ABA stand for? It's the American Bankers Association. It's a private entity that issues those routing numbers. It's not the Federal Reserve. And so currently, all 4 of those entities in the state of Wyoming, they're living up to Wyoming law under the Federal Reserve Act, have not received their routing numbers. Now, my opinion is, and I'm fortunate, I get a fair amount of rain from my boss, Senator Lummis, to speak towards these things, is my opinion in these types of situations is that it's not exactly a fair shake that these charters have received at the federal level. Hopefully, through the work of Senator Lummis communicating with the Federal Reserve and her counsel, her general counsel, Chris Land in DC, we'll be able to rectify that shortly. I'd say that Wyoming has received a fair shake for all of your hard work. I would be lying to you if I'd say that was the case. That is not the case. We have not received a fair shake from the Federal Reserve or the American Banking Association.
Mr. Chairman, follow-up?
Please.
And I think both of these issues are worth consideration of the Federal Reserve and the APA with regard to our special purpose depository institutions. So starting with the ABA, under what authority does this private organization have the ability to restrict access to what is effectively the routing number that we all use to move funds from bank to bank? ACH uses it, obviously bank accounts use it. It's integral to the operation of any banking institution across the country. What authority do they have that control through?
Mr. Chairman, this is kind of an interesting that we often see in laws. Just because we've always done something, by golly, we're going to keep doing it. Such is the case with the ABA. There's a lot of tradition behind it, and that's how it originally started out, was with the ABA. It was an easy fix having them do it. The real problem that comes for these types of institutions as they're these speedy institutions as they're moving through the process is they have to be able to prove that their system is auditable. They have to prove that their system is robust enough to be able to handle the different functionalities of a bank. Being enabled to do those things, they have to have a routing number that they can actually plug in and test. And every day that they're held back from actually testing that routing number and plugging it into their auditable system is every day that Wyoming laws are ignored. It's every day that Wyoming's economic development efforts are ignored. And so it's really frustrating in that regard. Looking at what's been said by the Banking Policy Institute, the ABA themselves, and several other entities, it is very clear, Mr. Chairman, that state charters standing up and states standing up and deciding to take control of their own destiny. It's not a welcome thing. It's not a wanted thing. The preference seems to be that, big Fed gov will handle this. You guys just sit back and relax. Thankfully, that's not who we are. And we built I believe to be a fairly robust system that takes into consideration the multiple facets that make things very complicated in regards to banking in 2021. And we did so in a manner that made the whole world flinch. And we're kind of sitting at this precipice now with something as silly as a routing number that's in place because it's been in place that way forever and ever. Amen. That's a big holdback.
So, Mr. Lindholm, do you know, is it just simply a private system that was designed that goes along with the Federal Reserve Act, or was there some point in time when the Federal Reserve Act or other federal legislation authorized that ABA number?
The latter, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. And Mr. Land, is that correct? Mr. Land.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
All of that. And Mr. Land or Mr. Lindholm, is there any federal preemption or anything in the Reserve Act or elsewhere that provides that authority to the ABA beyond just the tradition? Or is this effectively an open space where it's fully governed by tradition, but a state like Wyoming would have legislative authority to take action?
Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna let my attorney, Mr. Land, answer that question.
Mr. Chairman, maybe I should ask Ms. Long to stop live tweeting before I say any more. Because people in DC are like asking me like why she's tweeting right now. So that's
Free speech.
well, yeah.
On that note, I would say that this conversation has already served its purpose, if that is in fact true. That we are doing the absolute right thing right now if folks are starting to sweat.
Well, I'm really curious to know what our authority is within this space. Mr. Land, go as far as you're willing.
It's going to get done, Mr. Chairman. That's all I really want to say. There are a number of things that I'm working on, and our legal position is very clear, and our prudential, our regulatory position is really clear, and there's not really any discretion on behalf of the Federal Reserve. So this will get done at some point. But right now, the process just has to play itself out.
Mr. Chairman, with regard to that process, though, both with the ABA routing number and the Federal Reserve, that time is of the essence, in my view, as we're seeing other national banking institutions effectively, I'll just say circumventing the process, where our meticulously worked, organized, and scrutinized state process has been pushed backwards and delayed. So while I have no doubt that we'll eventually get there, one of the most important aspects of what we've done with our speedy banks and their ability to custody digital assets gets to the fact that as innovator, we had a first position, a first mover advantage that I'm afraid we'll lose if we wait enough time. So my question is, what can this select committee do, either through statute or through letter or through any other action, to expedite that process and either provide pressure on the ABA to provide those routing numbers, or on the Federal Reserve to appropriately conclude that our state chartered banks must be eligible for access to their payment system?
Mr. Chairman. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. No, you're absolutely right. The Federal Reserve would say, unfortunately, however, that the OCC is a different bank charter, and that the OCC is responsible for supervising national banks, and whatever authority they give them is up to them. I know that's kind of a cop out, but it's probably the truth, legally speaking. So there's no legal angle there. It is interesting too that the Federal Reserve hasn't agreed to give master accounts, generally to the OCC trust charter, which is somewhat consistent with the Wyoming approach. But I don't think there's a great deal that can be done, Mr. Chairman, as far as that can be done at select committee. There are some things that might need to be done down the line as far as if litigation were to come into play. But at the moment, I totally agree with you, though. We are losing our first mover advantage, and it keeps me up at night. But trying to play the cards that I have in front of me at the moment.
Can I add to that, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Thank you. And Mr. Land is absolutely correct. The only thing I would add on is something that this legislative body can do and should continue to do is exactly what you're doing right now. Flesh these things out, find out the issues, talking with your federal regulators, working with your executive branch, working with the governor on what I would deem is proper action. And I know the executive branch, and I know Senator Lummis have both been very active in working with the Federal Reserve and making those phone calls, calling Kansas City, and making sure that Wyoming's case is being heard. And so that process and what you're doing right now, I think, is invaluable.
Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Land, is there anything that would preclude or prevent, say, I don't know, maybe the Wyoming Bank Commission from issuing their own routing numbers? Is there any way we could circumvent that in our own statute? Perhaps it would help, perhaps it wouldn't, but at least we can have that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Western, no, unfortunately, it's the Federal Reserve that gives deference to the ABA routing numbers. So until that changes, we have no options on that front.
There's probably a lot of things we can do to the Federal Reserve in general that was.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, it honestly is of no surprise that we find ourselves having this conversation. Really? All of you guys took on a gorilla, and I wasn't part of So, I mean, we went down that road and we took on these Herculean tasks. We're not out of the woods yet, and we picked a hell of a fight. The Wyoming legislature is a very different animal than other legislatures in the regards that they're much more nimble and much quicker, and in my opinion, harder working. I mean, how many of us had to go look up what rehabilitation is, a bailment, all of those different aspects? How many of us spent nights pouring through FinCEN because we had to learn these things? And so as we move through this process, I think there's going to be federal regulators that have to read their own regulations and find out that indeed Wyoming is correct. But until that day happens, until they're pushed to the front in regards to making the decision, they have the ability to slow walk these things. And it certainly seems that that is the case.
Like in 2012, we learned a slogan called "End the Fed," and we didn't understand why. Now we certainly understand why.
No comment, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Long, or Land, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I would note too that, you know, in this space, no's tend to happen fast, and your applications get withdrawn fast and stuff. So, you know, like I said, if it was going to be a negative answer, it probably would have already happened by now.
That's true.
Mr. Collins. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wondered if Mr. Lindholm or Mr. Land might be able to give us all a little context and update with respect to what states like Nebraska and Illinois have done regarding their SPDIs and, you know, that first mover advantage we were talking about.
Mr. Land, did Illinois ever finish? You know?
Give me 1 second, Mr. Chairman. One of the benefits of being on Zoom is I can work on the fly.
The last we had seen, Illinois had not finished. They were at the final hurdle, third and final reading, or concurrence, I think it was, between the House and Senate. Those are a little bit different animals though, because they're specifically more towards trust. And this is actually a story I like talking about with people, is that there's only one trust company in all of the United States that has received a no action letter from the SEC in regards to qualified custodianship. And that is right here in the good state of Wyoming. That's two oceans. And so that's something to be really proud of. Otherwise, it has to be a bank in order to achieve qualified custodianship, because as Mr. Reville will tell you, it's not an easy hurdle getting a no action letter in regards to being a trust company. And so Nebraska went the route of being, or it's primarily aimed at being a trust, a special purpose depository trust. So they kind of took our law, took the best part out. I'm a little more biased towards the bank angle, and went the trust.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, just follow, that was kind of what I was getting at, the feedback I've gotten, and admittedly, I'm so focused on what Wyoming's doing, I haven't had time to really look closely at Nebraska and Illinois, but the feedback I've gotten from folks in the industry is that Nebraska really missed the boat.
Right.
And that the restrictions to, you know, no fiat deposits, for example, is a real deal killer for them. But I'm just curious if there was updates on other states and what other people might be working on. If you knew.
Right. Well, Texas passed a piece of legislation that was modeled off after Senator Nethercott, Senate File 125. But they kind of missed the boat too, because they pulled the lien cleansing provision out of that bill, which, as we all think, the lien cleansing provision is probably one of the best parts of that, especially as we look at some of the major exchanges doing lending on digital assets. So I think that lien cleansing provision is a big thing to miss out on. But I think they're looking at fixing that. Texas was a big mover in that regard. South Carolina certainly filed numerous bills. One of the things that I kind of get a chuckle out of as other states contact us and say, hey, we're going to do these things. And I'm sure you've all received those contacts as, hey, we're going to do these things. A lot of them get this ideology that they can just stuff everything we've done together into one big bill. Can you imagine if I would have, or Senator Nethercott or Representative Olson or Senator Rothfuss would have brought you that legislation? A 400-page bill that took everything into consideration.
Victory.
I thought saves a lot of people a lot of time. But needless to say, Mr. Chairman, those other states are not passing that legislation because it's too big of a pill to swallow. And so there's a lot of interest in there of going down the Wyoming route. We've been able to effectively change the ULC's mind in regards to what the Uniform Commercial Code should look like. And so lots of big victories in that regards, well, in regards to legal precedents, I would say that.
Mr. Chairman, on the UCC and ULC, we don't specifically address that anywhere on the agenda, but I do think it's important, or do we? I was just checking. I don't think we do. I think it would be useful for the committee to understand that, maybe the public to understand the developments with regard to our Senate File 125 that Senator Nethercutt sponsored a few years ago, and actions by the UCC, and maybe a little background on where they were and where they are now. That would be helpful as a national update if you provide us a little more detail.
You want me to, Mr. Chairman? Or you want Senator Nethercutt?
Okay, are you ready to?
I'm ready, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
well, before we move down that trail, Mr. Kaufman, did you have a follow-up?
Mr. Chairman, no, we can switch the topics.
Oh, okay.
I think we can circle back. All right.
Let's go down that trail.
Mr. Chairman, for those in the room, Senator Nethercutt filed Senate File 125, of which we were all co-sponsors on, and had all worked on with Senator Nethercutt to help her with her legislation. Arguably, in my opinion, that piece of legislation, and I think Mr. Land would agree with me on this, is probably the least known out of the bunch, and it should be the best known out of the bunch because of what it did. It doesn't have a fancy title like Dow or Special Purpose Depository Institution or anything like that. It's digital assets existing law, kind of boring. But what it set out to do was to essentially fit this new digital asset into how we handle existing monetary standards and holding those monetary currencies and those assets under the Uniform Commercial Code. The Uniform Commercial Code was developed by the Uniform Law Commission. The Uniform Law Commission developed the Uniform Security Act, and the list goes on. All of these different uniform laws and states will look to the ULC on and pick up and run that way their uniform. And that's the state's way of protecting federalism, essentially. If they all adopt the same thing, they keep the federal government, keep the wolves at bay, so to speak. And so it's been relatively a success. When Senator Nethercutt released her legislation, and as it was going through the process, I believe it was right before the final vote, the Uniform Law Commission sent a letter to every senator in the Wyoming State Senate saying what a horrible bill this was, how Senator Nethercutt was going to ruin the world. How dare she? As it is a theme. Senator Nethercutt was relatively busy getting that piece of legislation passed and ensuring her colleagues that the ULC was actually full of it. And so as the chairman of the blockchain task force and my co-chairman at the time, Senator Driscoll, we decided to draft a letter on her behalf that was 6 pages long, and in coordination with our legislative staff, which was at the time Mr. Land. And it was a 6-page letter where we absolutely trashed the Uniform Law Commission for their standards that they put out there. And then we also posted it publicly so the whole world could see it. And that was an effective letter. They didn't back down, but they backed down when it came to the House after it passed the state Senate 27-3, I think it was, Senator Nethercutt. So their letter wasn't very effective with the state of Wyoming Senate, thanks to Senator Nethercutt's standards. Because of that standard and the way the Uniform Law Commission, because Mr. Chairman, they had their own model piece of legislation out there that they really wanted Senator Nethercutt to take up. But for those Bitcoin type people in the room, it mandated that you can only hold your assets through an intermediary. And hold your keys, right? It was kind of, yeah, it was it completely rejecting the ideologies of what this entire asset classification was founded upon. And it didn't sit well with us. It didn't sit well with Senator Nethercutt, obviously, because she took into consideration private keys and public keys and what those different, she took into consideration a bailment, for example, and all of that speaks to the ownership of the asset unto itself. And over time, Ms. Long, myself, Mr. Land, I believe. I think is that it, Ms. Long? We're assigned as observers to the ULC as they redrafted. I think that's it. Ms. Long carried the weight on that though, Mr. Chairman, and did a great job advising the ULC on how they did things wrong. And the ULC's model legislation now looks very much like Wyoming's because of those efforts. So we were able to really drive the boat in that regard. I don't think it's as good as what we did with Senator Nethercott's legislation, but I'm biased.
And Mr. Chairman, a number of the members of the current Uniform Law Commission working group that's taken that up have worked with us on our working groups over the past few years to develop other legislation. So this community that we've grown over the past few years to develop this structure in Wyoming, this framework, really has, I think, brought in the best and most innovative thinkers in this space, and they're doing great work elsewhere as well.
Mr. Kaufman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, another question for Mr. Lindholm or Mr. Land. One of the first pieces of legislation after we fixed the money transmitter law was the utility token exemption that we passed. And I kind of feel like we all forgot about that because the industry kind of moved away from that initially back in 2017, 2018. But I sort of feel like we're coming back to that conversation, and now it's, at least that's part of my daily conversations with clients, is how in the world right now do you issue tokens? And it's a mess with respect to how do you do that. But I'm hearing grumblings about utility token conversation in Congress again, and specifically what we did here in Wyoming. I'm just curious if you all could give some insight on that conversation.
And I'll let Mr. Land jump in at the end here. I think legislation in that regard, that's a conversation that Mr. Land and I have had with Senator Lummis multiple times, and there is a need to address how a security is defined, specifically what it looks like in regards to these ICOs and some of these new tokens that are coming out, because the reality is some of them are certainly a security. Some of them are definitely not. They're very consumable in nature. So how do we fit that into the big question for us, Mr. Kaufman, is how do we fit that in at a federal level that respects states' rights? Because every state has a Uniform Security Act, and we don't want to pass something that is going to give other states an equal level playing field as the state of Wyoming. Just because you guys have put in the work, you've put in the time to make sure your Uniform Security Act points to good legislation that defines what a security is. And so I think that'll be second bill, Mr. Land.
Maybe, who knows? Who knows?
That was authoritative.
I think that's.
Oh, I just don't want, PR stories being put out by the media, whatever I say. So, yeah, I'm not going to talk about it publicly. You can ask me in private if you want.
Yes.
Just for committee's expectations, the Uniform Law Commission is meeting on November 5th and 6th. Our next select committee is November 9th and 10th. So I believe that it's on the agenda to finalize the proposed, it's going to be a new, for those of you who are attorneys, it's going to be a new Uniform Commercial Code article, Article 12. So it effectively does what our UCC addendum does, except we just map digital assets to existing articles of the Uniform Commercial Code. The proposal is to actually create an entirely separate and new article of the Uniform Commercial Code, Article 12. As Representative Lindholm said, it doesn't have the lien cleansing provision, but generally speaking, everything else is pretty similar. And there are a lot of people who helped the Uniform Law Commission get to that point of realizing that instead of fighting this, actually rolling up sleeves and helping to clarify was the right way to go. And we actually have a friendly relationship despite the history of the difficulties with the Uniform Law Commission. So I'm the first to compliment what they've done because they're getting to the right place, and thank several others. There's a Wharton professor, a professor from, I believe, SMU, and then a private practitioner at K&L Gates. All three have been very active in helping the Uniform Law Commission get to where it is. Long story short, we should probably assume that it should be on the agenda for the next meeting to make a decision whether we want to early adopt it. As Representative Lindholm said, Texas early adopted it in its draft form. It might not be the final form, but you can always go back and amend it with a technical correction later. Arkansas has also early adopted it, as has Nebraska. We have our own, and then Rhode Island adopted that old bad original one, but that means 5 states have done something to clarify digital assets. And ultimately, I suspect everyone will adopt the new UCC Article 12. But as you know, it has to go through every state's legislature. It's going to be, I mean, there are some legislators that still haven't adopted the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act 20 years later. So I don't know how fast it will actually be adopted by all the states, but I suspect given what's happened with this industry, it's now a $2.3 trillion industry, that there will be a big push to adopt the uniform proposal. We may, again, the big question for us is going to be, do we want to keep the lien cleansing provision in? And that might be something to request LSO to do some analysis of, some comparison of the differences between the two. But substantively, from what I've seen, that's the only real difference. The lawyers will quibble with my conclusion because, of course, how you get to the same conclusion is different. But ultimately, from a practical perspective, it gets to the same place. And we may want to turn around really quickly if it is indeed recommended by the Uniform Law Commission in their November 5th and 6th meeting, and look and take it up a few days later.
I think we should make sure that that's on the agenda for the November meeting, and ask staff to take a note of that to get an update and do that comparison of the final bill with our statutory construction and try and understand what differences there will be. I know that they use some different language and they came up with some different definitions that look different, but functionally, based on my understanding and following of it, is largely the same with the provision. We could get one of our colleagues as well potentially to join us virtually and present that work. I think that has been a member of that working group, bring them in to help us out.
I think staff's got that. That's a great idea. Thank you.
No, Mr. Chairman, if you're done with me, I'll go sit down.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
One more topic, and I don't think there's much on it. Anything at the national level on DAOs, any other states looking at copying what we've done or conversation about our legislation? I'm curious whether you're hearing anything.
I haven't heard anything in that regard, or how, I mean, that's primarily the duty of the states is to register businesses. And because how you did build it out, Mr. Chairman, and your committee, it looks an awful lot like an LLC and functionality. For tax purposes, I can't imagine the IRS worry about much more than that. But I don't know if Mr. Land has heard anything in that space.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The SEC and the IRS will have to recognize DAO as a valid form of corporations, a valid form of business entity at some point for it to be effective for taxation and location purposes, among others.
Thank you, Mr. Land. Move to our next topic on updates. That's the emergency of climate. Professor.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members, for allowing me to speak to you. I'll just update on things that are new and different at the University of Wyoming from.
We need you to introduce yourself,
Oh,
even
I'm
though
sorry,
we all
sorry.
know
I
who
am-
you are.
I am Steve Lupian. I am a professor at the University of Wyoming teaching blockchain and digital assets. I am also the director of the University of Wyoming Center for Blockchain and Digital Innovation. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for reminding me. Mr. Chairman, just some new updates from my last report. And I'll start with academics because, of course, that's truly our mission. We have started this semester a blockchain minor that I've spoken about before. And good news on the minor has been engagement from students has been extremely positive. We have a new introductory course, which is the first course you take as a part of the minor. We've had to raise the maximum class limit on that twice because of the unbelievable interest from students. So, and that introductory course will be offered in the next semester as well too. So we're going to have a pretty robust number of students that are starting the blockchain minor. To remind you all, the unique thing about the blockchain minor is it is interdisciplinary and will involve multiple academic units. You can choose paths for that minor through the College of Business, if you're a business student, engineering, and our School of Ag. And we are looking at the School of Energy Resources as well to participate in that program. So certainly great news in that front. We've also been pretty active with bringing in visitor professors through the Blockchain Center. Our endowed chair of banking and finance, Dr. Ali N. I don't want to butcher his last name, and Ali's a good friend of mine. I still can't pronounce the last name. Does a series of fireside chats. We have 3 of them. One is done, 2 more that are scheduled. Our first one, we talked about central bank digital currencies with a member of the Swiss central bank. So we're getting some really high-profile speakers talking about some important topics in this space. So very happy with that. Also, we have visiting professors now working with our School of Law through Professor George Moscary. And so we've got some real depth on the visiting professors that are coming in. Speaking of the law school, the University of Wyoming has a law practicum that's had for a number of years. This year, that law practicum is being funded through the Blockchain Center. So we're going to have a lot of blockchain topics in the law practicum. And I really do believe that there's a real opportunity for the University of Wyoming to take the lead in that space. I think, there is a shortage of really talented lawyers in this space. Most of the talented lawyers in the space are sitting here now. So, I think there's some real opportunity there. We also have continued to expand and have a good number of sections, which of course is across multiple academic units right now. So the College of Business has a fairly robust courses, including digital asset, money, and banking. We also are teaching courses now in supply chain that are heavily blockchain based, in addition to the courses that we're offering through the minor program. The College of Engineering is continuing to add more courses around coding and the technological aspects of this space. And so we'll continue to work with the other academic units to increase the inventory of sections that we have. So, last in the academics, I'm not ready to announce anything about this yet, but we are close to securing
a very generous gift that will allow us to expand in our smart contracts capability. We're contemplating a smart contracts institute, as well as significantly increasing our cybersecurity capabilities through our College of Engineering. So I hope to have something more to say about that when we get in front of you in November. So a lot going on in academics, and I really do believe that the University of Wyoming is taking a really a leading position among Division I universities in the academic side of what we're doing. So any question on academics before I move on? Sure.
Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lucan, thank you so much. Bit of a slightly different topic, but what is the University of Wyoming doing, if anything, with respect to creating new intellectual property with respect to blockchain, namely blockchain patents, for example?
Yeah, I'm planning on going over that. If you'd like me, Mr. Chairman, I can talk about that now. A couple of things. We are in the process right now of working with our ORED office on 3 potential patents. I don't want to, publicly state what they are, but I'm happy to speak with any of the members offline about what those patents are. And we're looking at the viability of those patents. We are an open space community, so you have to kind of balance the, what do you make open space and what intellectual property you protect. And we are working with our Office of Research and Economic Development and our General Counsel's Office to explore exactly what those patents could look like. But we are contemplating 3, so I'm happy to talk offline with you about what those might be. Something else in the intellectual property area that I am pleased to announce is we are going to be launching next week a very robust NFT marketplace through the University of Wyoming. Everyone is, the NFTs are talked about, quite a bit, and they really do offer some unique opportunities for institutions like the University of Wyoming. Most in our ability to easily monetize assets and programs that are difficult to monetize. For example, we are working on about a half dozen ESG tokens right now, which are tokens that are involved in offsetting carbon or could be involved in, we've got some tokens that are carbon capture tokens. We have some tokens that are carbon sequestration. We are about to start looking at how we could use NFT tokens as a marketplace for clean natural gas. So this NFT marketplace will be a perfect platform for that. We're also looking at tokenizing sports properties that the university has. Most of you may be aware that the NCAA has opened up the ability for student athletes to monetize their name, image, and likeness. How are they going to do that? Your typical student athlete is not going to, call up Coca-Cola and say, I'm looking for a sponsorship. NFTs offer an opportunity to easily monetize those properties. But also the University of Wyoming has a lot of sports properties that we have. The proverbial, end zone, game winning, toes in the line, photographs. We can create NFTs and market properties like that. So this marketplace will involve that. Also, think about other properties that universities have. Starting with students, we've got arts and science. So we've got students that are producing artwork. They're writing music. They're creating poetry. They're writing books. NFTs are a effective way to be able to monetize that. And because we're creating a marketplace, the students won't have to do that. On top of that, the university has an amazing library and museum system. And so we're identifying assets that are in those institutions and we are going to be monetizing those. In fact, I'll kind of pre-announce. No one will be surprised by this, but the first NFTs that'll be sold this week as a test are going to be the original photograph of Steamboat. So we're going to do a private sale of those to make sure our technology works, and then next week we're going to do a limited edition of that as well too. So, and then from that we're just going to continue to build out our inventory and have one comprehensive marketplace that each of the academic units can point to, and they don't have to do this all on their own. We'll do it all through this marketplace. So I hope that answers your question there.
And Professor, for those joining us around the world, they glazed over when you said Steamboat, but for us in Wyoming, we got very excited. Could you explain just real quick why that's significant?
Not originally being from Wyoming, but falling in love with this place when I moved here. I am absolutely astonished that we will put the bucking Bronco and rider on everything. In fact, if you look at Ms. Long's computer, there's a great representation stuck right on the back of that. So that is a very iconic symbol for Wyoming, and the University of Wyoming possesses the original photograph that was based on. So that's what our first NFT, fittingly, I think is going to be. Just a couple of other updates. Ms. Long did an excellent job on covering the hackathon. I did want to just point out two things. Representative Lindholm, do you remember the financial challenge you gave us last year that we thought was a stretch? Do you remember that number?
Yes, 200 or 300.
250.
250, that's right.
Well, I'm pleased to announce that we have more than doubled that. So the community has been amazingly generous to us this year in sponsorship and pledges. And so we're going to have to adjust that, Representative Lindholm, following this year. And we have an amazing community of sponsors. There's too many to list here, and I don't want to burden you with that, but I encourage everybody to go to wyohackathon.io and please thank our sponsors because again they have just been unbelievably generous. Just two last updates. Also through a generous gift that will be announced at the hackathon. We are going to be receiving tomorrow 12 Bitcoin mining rigs. And we are going to be setting those mining rigs up in our new engineering building, the EERB. And the mining equipment will be a mix of higher voltage 240 equipment and 110 equipment. It will be both air cooled and liquid cooled. And we're doing that because, again, this is about an experiential opportunity for our students. And so we'll be launching a mining club starting Wednesday. And over time, we're going to also incorporate into that club staking pool operations as well as validating. And so I think the University of Wyoming is going to be in a pretty unique position there as well too. There is, you will hear testimony later today from mining companies that are looking to relocate here to Wyoming. Well, one of the challenges I believe you're going to hear about is, we need to have a trained workforce that can then work with these organizations when they come to Wyoming. The company that is giving the gift is one of the largest mining companies in the U.S. And this gift came about because of that challenge. They have a very difficult time finding people that can come in who already understand this technology. So I think the University of Wyoming is going to be able to take a lead in that space as well. The last thing I want to talk about, and then I'm going to yield a little bit of my time, is I've talked about the work that the university has been doing in conjunction with the FBI and Homeland Security. We are working on a project right now on that task force to understand the risk of mining equipment from offshore being brought to the US. We have all heard that Bitcoin miners are being forced to leave China and find other places to come. The United States is certainly one of those, and as you'll hear this afternoon, Wyoming is certainly a destination for that. Well, are there risks to that equipment, coming into the United States? They will be hooked to our power grid. They will have access to internet, and so we just want to make sure that that equipment coming here doesn't pose any risk, because it could very well be domiciled in China and some other countries. So we are going to be working on that as one of our projects. As you know, the FBI typically works on hacks and challenges that kind of happen after the fact, as does the Homeland Security here in Wyoming. Homeland Security tends to work more on securing the public spaces, but there's certainly a void that I think Wyoming can address. And so the University of Wyoming is going to be working with an organization called Cyber Wyoming. If you haven't heard, I'd like to introduce Laura Baker and Rocky Case to come up and talk a little bit about what Cyber Wyoming is doing, because I do think it has relevance to each of you as you're looking at legislation moving forward. So would you like to start out by telling me a little bit about your organization?
Clarissa, would you mind spinning up the PowerPoint? Thank you. And we're gonna go fast, so keep up. Thanks.
Please introduce both of you.
Absolutely. So as Stephen said, I'm Laura Baker with Cyber Wyoming, and we're a nonprofit organization here in the state, and we run Wyoming cybersecurity competition for small businesses every year. So we've been doing that for 4 years now. I've got Rocky Case with me, and he runs Wyoming Manufacturing Works. And I want to thank you very much, Stephen, for inviting us here to give the committee an update. The concept that we want to discuss today all started because those of us in the trenches with small businesses, manufacturers, nonprofits, and local government are concerned about our economy, our clients, and the subject of cybersecurity. Without the foundation of good cybersecurity practices, all industries are at risk, including blockchain and digital innovation. So we are part of a committee that has put together a concept to address these concerns. Next slide, please. This is just the beginning of our conversation. We want to talk to others in the state. If you look at the supporting materials that we submitted, you can see a list of organizations and people that were part of this presentation. But more importantly, there are a lot of people that we still want to bring into the loop, as well as other legislators. So let's get started. Cybersecurity is a foundational subject that depends on humans to be personally responsible for their own security habits. Wyoming small businesses, manufacturers, nonprofits, and government can be quite vulnerable without technical staff to guide them through the subject of cybersecurity. And in our experience, there are a lot of these small organizations out there in Wyoming. So next slide, please. Let's start with the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center statistics for Wyoming. These are just reported losses that our businesses, municipalities, schools, and citizens have experienced. Business losses to fraud erode confidence. We all know that, right? But imagine what these numbers could grow to as we expand our technology capabilities in Wyoming. Next slide, please. It kind of puts our losses into perspective when you look at the state's budget. Now, this is one from a couple years ago, okay, so that I found online. But with Wyoming's 2019 losses, according to the FBI, we could have funded the entire Secretary of State's office. We could fund the Witchy program. We could fund roughly 8 different judicial districts. But instead, we lost it because of poor cybersecurity hygiene. Next slide, please. And we have had big examples in Wyoming over the past few years that have made the news, but the small organizations really go under the radar. The dentist's office that lost 6 months of x-rays. The real estate agent that had to buy a new laptop, the small construction company that had to pay a fake invoice. All of this affects our economy and our communities. The next slide, please. And we have industry trends that are reinforcing the idea that leadership responsibility and personal responsibility are both important when it comes to being secure. Some insurance companies are dropping cyber liability coverage entirely, but those that aren't are getting a lot tougher. They're raising rates and requiring businesses to do their due diligence so that their coverage won't be canceled. Beasley Insurance right now is requiring all Wyoming municipalities to fill out a new cyber risk questionnaire. Some banks are starting to require cyber liability insurance for businesses with large balances, but they're also strongly encouraging others with smaller balances to also buy the coverage. This is an actual example from a Wyoming bank. There are rumors going around that the Small Business Administration is going to start requiring cybersecurity plans along with the business plans. And because of the pandemic, remote work is becoming the norm, and Wyoming is a great place to live. We all know that, we live here. But we want to also support that image. Next slide, please. And Wyoming leaders don't realize that cybersecurity is the one field where we spend more on tech every year, but we continue to get worse. So look at this chart. This is why. Decisions that you and I make every day. I choose not to reuse my same password on multiple websites. I choose to clean my desk of sensitive information. But do your coworkers do the same? And note here that human risk is the top breach source for the past 5 years. It shows that cybersecurity truly is a human nature issue, not just a tech issue. So our approach, this is the next slide. We have to start with personal responsibility and level 0 knowledge. Many organizations in Wyoming don't know where to start when to manage these risks, and the published national standards are a little bit confusing to them. We want to start with human characteristics. Human characteristics make cybersecurity personal, real, and relatable. Next slide. We have to use techniques to change human behavior, not just technical interventions. We have to put people first because bad actors are hacking us, not just computers. Next slide, please. Our group that developed this presentation has looked at cybersecurity holistically, and we want proactive measures. Wyoming has amazing programs for critical infrastructure and also a really great incident response team thanks to the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security. ETS is protecting our citizen data on a day-to-day basis, and quite frankly, I'm very thankful for their expertise because it reduces my risk of identity theft. But where is the help for the small business, the small manufacturer, the small nonprofit, and the small towns? A lot of small towns don't have the staff to engage at the levels that the counties do for the assessments. Next slide. Well, let me tell you, the spectrum of cybersecurity solutions includes awareness of human risk characteristics, as well as education that ranges from level 0 to advanced certification. First, we want to improve cyber awareness statewide. Second, we want to strengthen the private and public sectors by providing this level 0 knowledge and meeting them where they are. By using human characteristics, we also can empower leaders with the ability to develop an organizational culture that behaves in a secure manner. How? Our plan is to use existing resources and proven security programs, but delivered with a human-focused approach. Next slide, please. So first, we suggest driving awareness with a public service campaign similar to Friends Don't Let Friends Drive Drunk. It was very successful. The Wyoming CAN Committee is a grassroots committee with community-minded individuals from all over the state, and they already have a draft campaign already. Overall, public security awareness leads to better security decisions, which enhances personal behavior. Thus, it emphasizes security as an essential workforce skill. Next slide. Next, the businesses, manufacturers, municipalities, and other organizations. Let's talk about them. We need to meet them where they are with existing proven programs for beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels. Next slide. Here's an example. The Cyber Readiness Institute's program focuses on human behaviors and 4 key issues: phishing, passwords, USBs, and software updates or patching. Right now, the Cyber Readiness Institute is implementing a program with Cyber Hawaii, one of my sister organizations, to use a squad of security advisors that help businesses through these 4 issues. But let's think about this for a second. We don't need a cyber squad. We have the SBDC. We have Wyoming Manufacturing Works. We have the Wyoming Nonprofit Network. We have Cyber Wyoming. We have Community Builders, Inc. and other economic development agencies that have business advisors, so we could train them to be our cyber squad. Next slide. If we want to address a little more than those 4 issues, we can move on to the intermediate level and the Made Safe in Wyoming program, which Cyber Wyoming developed. We created this with the advice of the UW Social Work Department because social workers know how to change behavior. And our outcomes are really good. Small business leaders moved from being pretty nervous about the subject of cybersecurity to very confident. At the start, leaders feel pretty alone, but by the end, they have a large network of people to call upon. And I think Rocky has some of the absolute best advanced services across the state for small manufacturers. So I'm going to let him talk about that model.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Olson. Committee, appreciate that. Just by way of background, Rocky Case, I'm the Center Director at Manufacturing Works here at the University of Wyoming. For those that don't know, we are a federal grant underneath the Department of Commerce. Underneath that, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And underneath that is the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. Each state has, plus Puerto Rico has one, and we participate. Our job is to keep manufacturers in our respective states and keep them competitive. So by way of that, why am I here? Multiple documents, including the National Defense Authorization Act and a host of others, have called out the Manufacturing Extension Partnership as the go-to folks for all things cybersecurity related to competition for DoD contracts and other government contracts. So that is what, if you know the code, that is what is known today as NIST 800-171. And that is undergoing kind of it's basically being re-racked right now. NIST 800-171 is kind of a, yes, I'm cyber secure, Scout's honor. I filled out the spreadsheet, good to go. In the very near future, that's going to be an audited process. It's going to be called a CMMC or cybersecurity maturity model certifications. So we'll have to go through this audit process. We want to keep our manufacturers in the state competitive, particularly related not just to maybe nationwide contracts, but at-home projects like GBSD that's getting ready to probably be issuing a drawing and so forth in the next couple, 3 years. The nuclear plant that has been proposed, there are a host of certifications that manufacturers will need to participate on that project. So basically, my team is locked and loaded and ready to do this work. So to Laura's point, it's keep it top of mind because it is going to be important as we move forward. These requirements are going to be in place. And it's not going to be Scout's honor anymore. So from a financial perspective, those folks that want to enter different markets and compete for these projects to increase their revenues, perhaps increase revenues to the state, stay competitive, and stay in Wyoming. Definitely aligns to our mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. We also can't forget about our towns and cities. Municipalities have that same range of knowledge, level 0 to more advanced. But we need to prepare small municipalities to get on the DHS roadmap. 2 more slides, please. Thank you. And some of these that might already be on the roadmap, but the thing is, you can always mature. Cybersecurity is a continuous improvement process. We need to make sure all of our municipalities are at least on the map. In small towns in Wyoming where there might be 1 full-time person, a couple of part-time person, elected officials wearing multiple hats, we all know what that's like, right? We are not trying to make these people security experts. We just want them to know enough to be able to manage the risk. So next slide. Our vision is to build on what we already have going for Wyoming. We already have the broadband ring, world-class data centers, groundbreaking blockchain laws, thanks to you guys, organizations willing to work together, and a business-friendly tax structure. Let's just think for a second about this. What if Wyoming also had a very security-minded environment? What if we were the only state in the nation where our cyber attack losses actually went down consistently over the period of 5 years. That'd be amazing, right? That would be a huge selling point for our industry to come into Wyoming, because more security-minded workers equals less company risk. The industry likes a security-aware workforce environment, and we can get there with a human approach. I want to pause here for a second and see if you guys have any questions before I.
call.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for, I guess, for the both of you. As I read through the presentation, the supporting documentation, it sounds like you'd like $30 million of ARPA funds to give to the Wyoming Business Council to run a marketing campaign to tell people about cyber threats. And it seems to me that small businesses, large businesses, and the public sector are pretty aware of cyber threats. I mean, it's not that we don't see the news about Colonial Pipeline. If I had $30 million, it seems like I'd want to give it to a state agency that we already have that understands information technology, ETS, and help them with cybersecurity, because that's what they're doing now. So in June of 2021, when we had a local governmental entity that was a victim of a ransomware attack, they turned to ETS and ETS helped them. And it seems like we ought to be supporting that. So I guess I'm trying to figure out what this would be. It seems like alluded to the fact that insurance companies are telling people, hey, if you don't have these procedures in place, we're going to up your rates. Isn't that a pretty effective mechanism to get small businesses who already want to be cyber secure to change how they're doing?
In our, oh, thank you. In our experience, small businesses actually, a lot of them are either can't afford the cyber liability insurance in the first place or avoiding it. To talk, we didn't actually want to talk too much about the 30 million. That's more of an ask for probably a different committee. What we really want to talk about today is, and it wouldn't be to the Wyoming Business Council, it's over all of those organizations that you would see on that chart, spread out throughout the whole thing. So what we are seeing today, yes, they're aware, but there's a giant hump between what they're aware of and what they actually do. And that's where we need this human focused approach. Because, you know, there's so many psychological distortions out there. Most of the people that I've talked to have said things like, well, I'm too small. Probably heard that too, Rocky. Yes, all the time. And then, you know, 6 months later, it happens to them. So it's really not, it's not the fact that we think that we're isolated and insulated because we are in our small rural state, but we are not. And I think that's really important when we have, you know, so much critical infrastructure here for oil and gas. All right, next slide, please. This is our last slide. So what we'd like today is we need a committee to champion, we need that committee to champion the cybersecurity efforts, because security practices are a foundational building block for all of our industries. We need a legislative champion that's willing to work with us. We want to enhance we want to enhance Wyoming's cyber risk posture. And we want to improve economic resiliency and enable diversification by making sure cyber risks are addressed. And that's, once again, just getting those businesses over the hump of what they know to what they actually do. It's a behavior change model.
Any questions from Ms. Baker, Mr. Case?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, in listening, I know one of the biggest fears out there with cybersecurity, as far as our small businesses and all, is the expense of the, all this programming. And the thing of it is, they make you a great deal the first year, and then all of a sudden things just start skyrocketing on into where you're out of control. What you're paying for, and you're not seeing a dividend of that. Is there a way for us to help protect or cushion that in some way?
Yes, I do think that there is a way to do that. And some of the discussions that we've had on the committee are direct money directly to the small business to help that cushion. The other thing is that we have to remember that we do have a fabulous response team in the state, but we don't have the proactive protect side completely there. And so if we can protect ourselves, we can get lower insurance rates, right? If we can show that we're protecting ourselves to the insurance companies, we can get lower response rates. If our cyber attack money goes down in Wyoming, we can get lower insurance rates because we're in Wyoming and we have a more security aware culture.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next part of that would be, is what we have more predominantly because we're small and therefore people don't see us as the big threat, but as we grow in certain areas such as this, all of a sudden this becomes a real, focus point of attack. And so at the same time, how do we, as we grow, continue to protect that?
Thank you. That's a really good question. Just in the last 2 years, according to the FBI statistics, this is a great example. Both blockchain and cryptocurrency investment scams have increased in Wyoming dramatically. And so, yes, we do need, this is why I think we need a public awareness campaign, or why the committee thinks we need a public awareness campaign. Because most of those go towards the younger generation. And you would think that they would be more security aware, but statistically they're not. And it's because they're more comfortable with the technology. They've grown up with it. They trust it more than people of Gen Xers in my generation. And so I think you have to start with awareness, and then you need to move on to the actual micro level and the human focused and the human touch.
Mr. Chairman, if I might add, just from the revenue increase side of things, we were recently manufactured here in the state of Wyoming that has some very unique capabilities. And the DoD approached them about doing a particular contract. Unfortunately, they did not have the proper certifications in place. If they declined to bid, it was a pretty big contract. Good news is we're now underway on getting them the certifications that they need. But there's a real world at-home example of that happening right here.
Thank you. That's good. Thank you, Mr. Case. Mr. Chairman? Yeah. On the certification question, I think that is another essential point. There's the awareness side, but then there is the rigor in certification and adherence to standards. If you want to see contracts that are federal contracts, but honestly also even business-to-business relationships, do we have a robust network in Wyoming that can provide that certification? Do we have that capacity available, or are we typically seeking out-of-state entities to come in and provide that advice, guidance, and certification?
Mr. Chairman, through you, there are not a whole lot of folks from a certification standpoint in Wyoming. I have a group of 3 that we work with, third-party contractor, but by and large, this is an outsourced component. Unless somehow they find manufacturing works, the private industry says, I want this certification, they go do the research, by what they're going to wind up going to an outside of Wyoming entity.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, follow up on that. Do other states have any models that facilitate or ease that? Is there anything that Wyoming to make it easier for our businesses to seek those types of certifications internally, as opposed to, again, having to kind of dig through the internet, figure out who does it, figure out what the requirements are, and effectively just figure that all themselves and then hire a contractor? Is there a better way, a better model?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you. I work very closely with my colleagues throughout the U.S., particularly Vermont, Washington, Oregon, Michigan, so those 5 have really kind of cracked that nut. We've tried to model what we're doing here after that, and I think that in some respects this is the beginning of that conversation. What does it look like in Wyoming? Because I've got a team of approximately 10 folks, and we don't have the bandwidth to do what it takes for us. We can. And I think this is kind of the beginning of that conversation as to what does this look like on the other side for the state of Wyoming.
Chairman, if I might add to that. We have really worked closely, Rocky and I have worked very closely over the last couple of years just to make sure that our programs flow seamlessly into each other. And so even though he has a group of 10 and I have a group of like 3, we do try really hard to make sure that we work together with these programs and ensure that no client gets left behind, basically. And so if something, Senator Rothfuss, if somebody wants to go for an advanced certification and they are maybe on the edge of a manufacturing client, right? We'll work together to make sure that they at least get the services that they need.
So thank you.
And Senator, Mr. Chairman, through you just add on to that. Although we are Manufacturing Works, AKA the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, I'm agnostic as to who I work with. If you're a faith-based organization or nonprofit or whatever, I can still offer those services.
All right, thank you, Ms. Baker. Mr. Case.
Mr. Chairman.
Public comment?
We will now open up for public comment on this. Anyone in the virtual world pre-registered for this? Sorry.
PW.
Okay. Sure. Legislation.
For someone to connect remote. I'm not sure what's doing. How do I do so?
Is there anyone in the room that wants to provide public comment on this? No. Want to go here first?
That's fine.
So,
Go ahead and just start by using your name, and if you represent an organization you're with, or you're just representing yourself, that's fine too.
Represent myself, John Stokes. So I guess the question I have, I guess it originated around how to ensure digital assets or bridge to physical assets. Kind of give a proof case on the direction I'm going. So I'd like to create like a tokenized fund managed by a DAO that can essentially invest in infrastructure in Wyoming. And the infrastructure I'm going towards would be like a spaceport, right? And how this tokenized fund could be insured in a way to provide that public utility, and at the same time open up the gateway to provide for this really granular democratized access to these digital assets by allowing, like, say, a taxi driver in Africa to invest $1 in Wyoming's infrastructure.
I really feel like I was gonna give that one to Mr. Kaufman, but Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I think we have all the tools in place to do exactly that. I do think that you've probably reached a point where you're into security, and that's where we have experts in this space, and therefore it would be federally regulated through the SEC, unless it were only internally funded through state investments. So if you had Wyoming only investors, we could have a limited investment capacity for that. I think what you described, if it's a spaceport, is going to dramatically exceed that, and so it would get into the security space. Funding an infrastructure process, though, I guess I wonder if that does qualify as a security. If it's being seen as an investment, it probably becomes a security.
Because there's definitely like dividends that be paid from the transaction.
Work through the chair and respect the process. So you'll want to address through Chairman Olson.
I'm not wild about being called Mr. Chairman, but it's just.
He is, yeah. So I think it can be done with the statutes that we put in place. With the only challenge in the space of having to register as a security, which I think it would qualify as. And I guess I'd look around, we have experts, Mr. Kaufman, Mr. Ville, others that have kind of gotten into this space a little bit. I'd see if they share that conclusion.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the question. I think what you said is absolutely accurate. Obviously, this is a layered analysis to arrive at that answer as to what's a security, and regardless of whether or not it's structured through a DAO, it still may be or it might not be. But what you said so far is absolutely correct.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, I guess I would say then, go ahead and do that. Let's get those funds raised.
The highlightation of the digital asset space and the space economy, like they're both on parabolic trajectories. Combining that and bringing that to Wyoming, you'll just growth be exponential.
Thank you for your comments.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, it appears that our participant Jack is expecting, so we can go ahead and move on to more.
When it works out. Other public comment, come on. So. What do you want us to know?
All right. Well, I am Jade. I'm the warrior princess of tech from Silicon Prairie Holdings. And this is my founder and business partner, David Dushini, Silicon Prairie.
Oh, sorry.
I gotta see it. The little Duke. So we are primarily technologists. We're from Minnesota. We have a suite of regulated business entities, including investment crowdfunding portals, where someone is seeking an exemption from registration. We can do that. We also have an SEC transfer agent. And then we also purchased a FINRA reporting broker dealer, and we're actually thinking of re-domiciling some businesses here. So you guys did a great job of making Wyoming look attractive for tech
What do you need
companies.
to know to finish domicile?
Well, we're here to talk about a banking charter potentially. So we help companies raise capital lawfully and legally. We have lots of regulators that we report to. We actually drafted legislation that we're happy to share with you in Minnesota for a secondary market that could be potentially leveraged using the state crowdfunding law, which is securities. I know Wyoming has the WINS program, and so there is an opportunity to potentially pair lawful capital formation using exemptions or registrations, and then pairing that on the back end with blockchain-based distributed ledger tracking. But everyone's focused on capital formation, but nobody's thinking about the secondary market piece of it because liquidity is everything.
Now we're talking. Yeah.
Here we are.
Here we are.
You got Mr. Kaufman.
So we have all live working stuff for that. The technology is not the problem, it's the regulation. And we're lining up to comply, but we had a bad time with the state of Minnesota, and at a certain point we realized that state governments are vendors too. And so we've been having conversations.
We're looking for a new vendor.
We're looking for a new state. And then probably the last piece that's a little bit interesting is I'm leading a trade group for transfer agents. I don't know if everyone's familiar with what a transfer agent does. Is normally in the public markets, they're the people who tally the votes for like a shareholder meeting, that sort of stuff. We're basically introducing that into the private markets as well. A lot of people aren't aware that transfer agents can have custody of securities as well as funds. So it's slightly different. But there's a trade group that's developing some blockchain technical standards for that. We're going to release a guidance document in October. So it's not too late if you have strong feelings on technical standards that are chain agnostic for either tracking blockchain for securities or trading on a blockchain for securities. You can come find us all week. We'll have the Blinky badges on. And find me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. So if you're going to pause, I'm going to go to Mr.
No,
Kaufman.
Okay, perfect.
Mr. Chairman, so I just wanted to understand a little more. Your idea is to use the state crowdfunding offering exemption with a license to offer through intrastate means, secondary market offerings of whatever token you decide to list or register, and then just do that on a state-by-state basis?
Correct. That we think is the easiest path because essentially there is some regulatory uncertainty with regards to secondary sales. And so we're trying to figure out if it makes more sense. There is actually already existing legislation in Michigan. Michigan has essentially their Michigan Market Act that no one's actually leveraged at this point, but that would then federally preempt the ability for secondary sales for securities sold pursuant to state-based exemptions.
Can I add?
Sure.
So Iowa and Florida are also kind of looking at that as well. So they're kind of asking us for our feedback on that. We have 4 different interstate portals in the Silken Prairie. We have Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Michigan, as well as the regulation crowdfunding Reg CF under FINRA. And so we have been doing that since about 2016. The pathway that we have, if someone wanted to issue a token or a coin, is you do investment crowdfunding so that you have a lawfully, either registered or exempt security. Then you move it over to the transfer agent side of things. That's where you're going to add your cryptographic key pairs or multi-sig wallets, any of that. It can even just be a notary event. It does not have to be on a public chain. And then whatever chain that you did want to have, then you get that chain ready. Of course, David wrote his own coin years ago, so that's available for educational purposes as well.
So just out of curiosity, so how would you match buyers and sellers who cross state lines?
Yeah, very good. So a lot of the at least with the federal side of things, we've got essentially an identity program in place, AML, KYC, CIP, and so you could require a photo ID or proof of residency documents to show that they have either a bank account or a utility bill, for instance, to demonstrate that they are lawfully allowed to acquire those securities. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the issuer who produced those securities has a right to control who's on their cap table. So you don't have to allow your competitor on your cap table or your roommate's crazy cousin onto your cap table. And so our model essentially puts the transfer agent in between the buyers and sellers and the issuer in case the issuer has a preemptive right of first refusal to buy their securities back. And so we've been very thoughtful and intentional about how to build this. We just need a place to domicile it and set it up.
One more follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Would you make a distinction in between tokens that arguably aren't securities?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, so if it's lawfully issued and has essentially, represents some sort of value it's been designated as not a security, you could have a qualified matching service, a QMS, in place to facilitate liquidity.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, that's candidly, that's one of the problems that we keep facing, or at least that I keep facing here in Wyoming. And that is we've got this utility token exemption, which a lot of people want to use, but it's probably only intrastate.
Right.
No one's really that interested in only selling tokens to 600,000 people.
Right.
And then the second you go across state lines,
right,
you either acquiesce that you're a security and register, or you just take a gigantic risk.
That's correct. Yeah. And so one of the things you could do, the problem with tokens is that they're not first class digital assets and that they don't have private keys or public keys. And so you can't benefit from multi-sig wallets, but you certainly could do a digital notary event in there to prevent the transfer to an unlawful individual.
And can I add?
Sure.
So if something started off maybe a bit in a gray space and you want to find a path into, come out from the cold, you could do an investment crowdfunding round to clean up the messy cap table. We call that issue to exit, issue new terms to exit the old ones. Then that would bring you onto the rail of, okay, now this is either an exempt or a registered security. And then you have some regulatory clarity around how that can be handled. But the appropriate transfer restrictions are a huge part of it that a lot of people miss. The transfer agent is key in this.
Super interesting.
Thank you.
Representative Western.
We can just keep talking.
So walk me through, Mr. Chairman, walk me through a real example. Obviously, use names if you don't want it, but a real customer who said, had this kind of dilemma. This is the kind of a solution. Walk me through start to finish and what this looks like.
Absolutely. So state-based crowdfunding is really good for hyper-local deals, right? Think of a brewery, for instance, right? Breweries and crowdfunding have a long and glorious history, right? You have a right to acquire an interest in that business, right? They're selling the amazing upside of that business. But at some point, your doctor may say you should stop, going there to get your free beer, right? Now you have a need to sell your interest. How do you do that, right? So we think that by having essentially regulatory clearance on secondary sales would facilitate liquidity so that investors could get out either by selling it back to the issuer, which they can do today, or by selling to another shareholder who might be on the cap table, or to another interested party who's eligible to acquire that. So you could then also by using the blockchain-based distributed ledger on the backside of it, use essentially, especially this is interesting for real estate, essentially friction-free real estate investment trusts or dividend reinvestment programs. You can essentially bypass a lot of the legacy infrastructure by issuing dividends on chain to the beneficial holder.
Dividends.
And so your output functions as an index trying to pair the interested seller, the interested buyer, correct?
We provide the intermediary where buyers and sellers discover each other.
And Chairman, follow up. I'm assuming that's part of your business model is saying, hey, we're the people that's making the magic happen between the people who are interested in buying a share of the brewery, the people who own shares, and we're supposed to want to be through security, token, however you want to classify the actual asset, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, we actually do have a broker dealer, and under that, we're getting an alternative trading system designation for that. We are nickel beady in that we're not holding the securities or the funds in the broker dealer, but we have the ability to do that matching.
Mr. Chairman? Could that not potentially be a service if you guys became a speedy institution, a sort of service that you could offer?
Absolutely. Our hypothesis is if we help you raise capital, you'll still need other banking services, such as, depending on the level of banking, charter or license, lines of credit or SBA loans, et cetera. So we think that, the transfer agent is an entity that predates the formation of the SEC. It's a dwindling client or a dwindling population. Essentially, there's about 150 left. Banks naturally are transfer agents. We did actually just gain clarity from FINRA. They did not understand that transfer agents are permitted to hold securities and investor funds. So our model essentially puts the transfer agent in between the broker dealer and the issuer to facilitate that essentially, the custody. However, our work on the blockchain standards committee, we have a model that uses multi-sig wallets, which you can go look up. That would essentially eliminate any sort of single point of failure with regards to custody, so that you could have the issuer, the transfer agent, potentially the broker dealer and or the investor all play a role in facilitating the transfer of their assets on chain.
And the multi-sig wallets also can help with issues of Ishima.
Thank you. So my interest was just making sure that you had access to resources in Wyoming, as well as an understanding, and you may already know this, the financial technology sandbox that we implemented a number of years ago provides some flexibility. So if there are any statutory restraints or constraints that kind of prohibit this type of operation, then there's the availability of flexibility through our Division of Banking or our Secretary of State's office to kind of provide that flexibility and then come back to this committee and say, hey, here are some hangups that are probably legacy or antiquated that need to be updated. So I'm curious to hear what challenges you had in Minnesota that you were running into. I mean, we don't necessarily need the whole story. Yeah,
but it's all public compliments with the SEC. With the sordid history, but
I have a whole letter attached to my LinkedIn. It's like 20 pages.
The short answer is that we registered first as an intrastate broker dealer, which they were quite surprised to find out that we could do. Our registration became statutorily effective, which they did not like. And then we had to go to an administrative hearing to get them to back down, in which case we just went up market to FINRA to become a broker dealer federally.
It turns out they weren't following the actual state laws of Minnesota. So regularly we were asking them, can you show us the rule or the statute? At one point, they even tried to use the state privacy law to avoid meeting with us about us. That's like a doctor saying, I can't meet with you due to HIPAA.
I guess the last call is just that in a lot of these state laws, there are some really weird old restrictions around secondary sales, with regards to like no more than 10 non-issuer isolated transactions, which I'm frankly not sure how anyone will be able to track and measure anyway. So we need to have essentially some regulatory clarity, especially with regards to the secondary sale. Operating a federal portal here under the winds, that's a no-brainer. Secondary sales, we think liquidity is everything because people have a right to get out of their investments.
Mr. Chairman, then, final comment is this select committee was really set up to modernize a lot of what we do in Wyoming and to look for these types of flaws like you experience in other states and then address them. As we say, we regulate to enable, not regulate to restrict. We try and build a foundation for what you're trying to do and start up and innovate. So work with us, and we're here for you as resources. And the room is full of other resources that I think would be very interested in the work that you're doing. And Wyoming seems like the place for you to domicile. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Further public comment? Our digital commenter? All right, with that, we'll take a 15-minute break and we'll be back at 10:40.
Everyone, please mask or walk around. You want to do on campus all time?
Pretty close.
Yeah.
I'm here with the rights. Oh, and Mike.
Mhm. You got this.
Yeah. All right, we are back. Welcome back. Exciting morning and exciting topics to come. This next one, cryptocurrency lottery, something that I remember Representative Winholm's not, but I remember Representative Winholm and I talking about this 3 years ago. And we didn't have it on a topic then, but now we do. And so excited to begin the conversation now. Mr. Caucus.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I don't know.
Well, how do you want to proceed? Do you want to proceed with any general comments or go straight to the bill, go to the bill draft?
Would you like me down there, up here?
Wherever you'd like to be. You can just hang out there. That's fine.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So maybe just a little bit of quick background on this bill. For those of you that don't know, obviously I work as outside counsel with the law. Historically, there was a policy decision made by the Wyoming legislature to only allow people to buy lottery tickets with cash, and that's it. There's been a few attempts in recent memory, you might recall, to allow debit cards, credit cards, some other things. But the policy was we don't want people taking on debt. We want people paying with cash only for these. So in that vein, there's been a lot of exploration with the increasing use of virtual currency as to whether or not there's an opportunity to boost lottery revenue through the use of virtual currency. And so as at least not all virtual currencies, but as Wyoming defines them, and the virtual currencies that are currently being evaluated are most often bearer instruments. They have cash-like properties in that they can be spent without a credit aspect to them. And so that's what this bill targets. It simply creates a mechanism, and obviously I want to steal what Mr. Hopkins is going to say and the verbiage of the bill, but this simply creates a little bit of relief from the cash-only requirement and creates an opportunity, not a mandate for anyone, but an opportunity for the lottery to evaluate accepting virtual currency and even paying some of the small level prizes or potentially large level prizes in virtual currency as well. That's really it, Mr. Chairman. There's some language obviously in the bill to clean up, to remove the reference to cash only. There is one suggestion I may have for the bill for some language that we might remove after, but that's the quick context on the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Great, thank you. Let's go ahead and
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office. Reviewing 22 LSO 66 Working Draft Version 5 Cryptocurrency Lottery. As Mr. Kaufman went over, he kind of gave a pretty solid overview of the bill. Specifically, some of the changes that we see here are just some of the policies mandated by statute, particularly in 917-108 on page 2. Subsection A, paragraph 2. On lines 11 and 12 there, we see a change where we are striking only the cash only, so and allowing for a virtual currency as defined in Wyoming statute 3429-101A4, and that's just the definition of virtual currency in Wyoming statute. Approved by the board, so there would be a requirement for any virtual currency to be used, and it would have to be one that the board has approved. It would not just be any virtual currency. And then the other changes on lines 13 and 14 are kind of simply grammatical type changes. Further down on lines 19 and 20, you see the insertion there or the equivalent value in virtual currency. And we'll see that on several other paragraphs in the bill. That's simply allowing for payout in virtual currency, particular kind of conforming amendments in those paragraphs for those smaller amounts. On page 3 of the bill, towards the bottom, striking cash, reference to cash tickets, cash prizes, and that's again primarily to allow for virtual currency. And then on page 4, again some conforming amendments there, allowing for payouts or for in particular paragraph G, unclaimed prize money to include the Staff comment there is just noting that dates for the effective dates still need to be set, particularly on page 5. It is requiring the Board of Directors of the Wyoming Lottery Corporation to promulgate rules. And this version of the bill draft would require that they promulgate rules for the purchase of tickets and award of prizes to be made in virtual currency. So currently, the bill draft would require them to promulgate those rules. The committee can certainly consider whether or not that's necessary. Split effective date, section 3 there, to allow for those rules to be promulgated. Again, we need to probably tweak that effective date, whatever the committee sees fit. And with that, it's 3 questions.
So really just doubly modernizing our statute, fixing the cash problem, but also modernizing it with virtual currencies.
Mr. Caucus, if I may just, as a matter of discussion, the only thing I wanted to bring to the committee's attention, and Mr. Hopkins and I have discussed this a little bit, is the very last change on page 4 regarding that unclaimed prize money. I said I'd leave it to the legislature's will, but I don't think that change is probably necessary. And there's a lot of misunderstanding sometimes with the way this works. So the lottery maintains a prize fund of money from people that don't ever claim their prizes. And of that fund of money that is sitting there, up to $200,000 a year is to be used to support problem gaming in programs in the state of Wyoming. So the lottery has an MOU in place with the Department of Health where they fund that program. I'm not sure that I foresee a circumstance where we're going to convey that money in virtual currency. It probably is just going to be by traditional means. So I think we leave that language out. Just a suggestion, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman? Yeah. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. The other point of consideration is with regard to section 2 and draft to affirmatively require regulations drafted. And I guess I'd ask Mr. Kaufman and others whether at this point we want that language in to make that requirement by a date certain, or whether we want flexibility, whether we want to wait a while, any sense of that. Either Mr. Kaufman, start with you and anyone else.
Mr. Kaufman. Mr. Chairman, thank you. My only comment would be, and in working with the lottery on this, it's likely going to be that the lottery will need to use a financial institution to help assist this. And while we have 4 that have been chartered, we don't have any that are fully operational yet. So having a date certain might be a little tricky because I think it might require cooperation with some of these new institutions. So might be better to leave it flexible. That's just my thought right now.
But my understanding is, as drafted, it would allow lotteries to be paid in virtual currency or to pay out in virtual currency or to have a lottery that you pay in virtual currency and the payout is also in virtual currency. So it runs the gamut as far as what they
Excellent. That's how I read it. Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hopkinson, and maybe from us and members of the committees, I wonder if there was any thought of a time period of what the equivalent value of virtual currency is, because I could see someone trying to hold on to their ticket and then claim that they want the value of the virtual currency when it was lower in price, when now when they redeem it, it's higher in price, so they could get more money than what they actually want. So is there language that we could do to put in something like at the time of redemption, equivalent value of redemption or something like that, Mr. Hopkinson?
Or would that be appropriate for their rules and regs, or would they even contemplate it? Just Mr. Hopkinson.
Mr. Chairman, I think that we could add language along the lines of, value at the time of the winning or something along those lines. It also wouldn't be an issue if you're just talking about paying in and paying out in a virtual currency. That kind of lottery wouldn't have that same concern. But you're right, absolutely, with respect to where paying with virtual currency, pay out in cash, or paying in cash and pay out in virtual currency.
Oh, even within hours, it fluctuates that significant, depending on the currency. I would hope they would use an extremely volatile currency, but if they did, those can move pretty quick. Mr. Kaufman?
The only thing I would add, Mr. Chairman, is yes, we did discuss that and I think the concern is valid, but from a logistical standpoint, if someone is paying for a ticket with a virtual currency, obviously the risk is going to be on the lottery to convert that or have a program or policy with respect to the risk tolerance and conversion. In terms of payout, I mean, right now, that's not necessarily in the works. As I was just saying, that would require probably another intermediary at this point in time. But I think that risk can be mitigated by denoting just what the currency is, right? So we're not at that point in time. Just like now you go to a UW game and you play the raffle, right? You're going to play based on the value today, or you're playing to win a motorcycle or whatever the case may be. So through special promotions, that could be denoted that you're going to win 1,000 Cardano or whatever the case may be. I guess that was a long-winded way of saying, I think that could be dealt with through the game rules, not so much via the statute. That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think the game rules may accommodate it, but getting at Representative Yin's concern, if, for example, we take top of page 3 as the language in case in point. So beginning on page 2, the board may provide for a limited number of retailers who can pay prizes of up to $5,000 or the equivalent value in virtual currency. I guess the question is, all right, they're able to pay out $5,000, and on day 1, my award in virtual currency has a value of $4,950. So it would be okay if you're doing that conversion that day. They would be legally allowed to pay it out. Well, 3 days later, that price has gone up 14%. Now all of a sudden, I've got a value of $5,500. Now all of a sudden, that particular retailer is no longer able to pay it out, and they I think do need a reference point. That reference point might be available through rule and regulation. What's the date certain on which the award value is determined pursuant to statute, such that that determination can be made by the retailer? I mean, could they just wait a couple of days and you know, all right, the value went down $11. I'm checking right now. As a matter of fact, there's a dip. I can cash out right now. Give it to me quick, because we've got a turn. It hit bottom and it's heading back uphill. So I need my money now.
Mr. Kaufman. And the simple answer to that, Mr. Co-Chair, is that we don't have the rest of the statute in this bill, but the policy of the statute is for small prizes. The lottery is authorized, the board is authorized to tell retailers you could just pay that prize out directly. Once you get over that threshold, then the lottery just has to issue that prize payment directly. So all that changes is now the retailer doesn't issue that payment, the lottery does directly. So I guess what I'm saying is, if the value did fluctuate in the meantime, all it would matter to the player is the check coming from the retailer or from the lottery. It's a different payment mechanism, same ultimate result.
Mr. Chairman, and I certainly understand that aspect of it, so they would get their money. It's just a matter of the uncertainty around whether a retailer would be compliant with law if they were paying out $5,010 worth of a specific crypto one day, depending on when the calculation was made. And I think they would want clarity so that they don't violate this law effectively. And that clarity might be through rule and regulation, but it's almost, is it for the equivalent value in virtual currency on the day awarded, or calculated on the day awarded, or calculated, it needs to be a date certain relative to the contest, not relative to the collection, I guess is what it comes down to provide that clarity.
Joel? My point was sort of made, but it just seems to me, Mr. Chair, that
denominating in the cryptocurrency would resolve a lot of the issues. It's sort of like a lottery could be giving away a car, and the value of that car can fluctuate, but you're still giving away a car. So can the rules be written such that the prize is the prize, regardless of whether its value is fluctuating in dollar terms?
That's an excellent point. And I think the question is whether we want to wrestle with the answer to that. Whether we want to fix a time certain or leave it as such, or leave it to the lottery to wrestle with that policy question. Because I guess there really is a policy question there. In your example, it is what it is, whatever the value is, that was the deal. That was what you bought it. But is that what we want?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any problem leaving it up to the board if they have the flexibility to make that choice in a rational way. And it seems like based on what we have with the A paragraph that guides these provisions, so this is page 2, lines 4 through 7, and all of our modified paragraphs are below that. So it's the board may adopt regulations, policies, and procedures regulating the conduct of lottery games in general, including but not limited to regulations, policies, and procedures specifying. And then we have the manner of payment of prizes, et cetera, or the equivalent value in virtual currency. It seems to me that the construct there would provide them with the flexibility to kind of make that judgment. But I guess I'd ask Mr. Hopkins, should we be providing some more flexibility there on the specific clause, or does that paragraph A governing provision satisfy the need?
Mr. Chairman, I think that is kind of a policy question. If the committee wants that in statute or the way it is now, it would be up to the lottery corporation to decide that, to promulgate those rules. Mr. Kaufman, as far as whether or not that is something they can do, but I guess I've got some idea of that in the works. As far as if that's, I guess if the question is broader and asking if that's an unlawful delegation, I would counsel at this point.
Mr. Kaufman. Mr. Chairman, all I would add is I think you made the point already, and that is for other games that the lottery has, they already set by rule, and the board approves those rules, whatever the circumstances of the prize might be. So I don't really see this a lot differently.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask Representative Yen, he was the one who raised the concern, if he's satisfied that rules and regulations will meet this need, or
Representative Yen, have we properly deliberated on this topic? Would you like more?
Mr. Chairman, thanks. I think it'd be interesting to see what the lottery corporation could come up with rules and regulations. And if we are unsatisfied with that, I'm happy to talk about it again next year, or whenever after that happens, to the point where we could put it in statute if we find them to be unsatisfactory.
Thank you, Representative Yen. Anything else? No. Probably anything else? Nope. We do have, is the CEO on, is he on Zoom?
Mr. Chairman, he was gonna join us via Zoom, but he's having some internet connectivity issues. So I'll let you know if he drops.
That's twice. It's not us.
Our internet works,
right?
My phone works.
Okay. All right, well, yeah, I guess we can move to public comment. If he gets in, we'll bring him back in. Oh, do we have any other public comment signed up in the virtual poll? No. Public comment on crypto lottery. All right.
That'll save us time.
That will save us some time. Would you like to comment? That's a really good idea, actually. Yeah, that,
You want to catch title change to lottery amendments?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
by the time the bill gets to the Senate, if they had seen this feed, they'll forget that they saw this.
Let's turn the audio down.
Actually, I've been more worried about the house, actually.
Yeah.
But, yeah. All right. Senator Murphy, you look like you wanted to weigh in.
I guess as a banker, I'm very concerned about the fluctuation value of this cryptocurrency. And to force, well, I understand it says the board can approve it, but I'm still concerned about the fluctuating value. So I'm going to be a no vote on this bill because of that issue.
Senator Murphy.
Chairman?
Yes.
But, to address that concern, I think, once again, it's workable in the concept that if you're buying a cryptocurrency lottery ticket, for example, in a specific cryptocurrency, and you're receiving the award in that cryptocurrency, which seems like a rational approach potentially. It doesn't matter whether it fluctuates because you're staying in the same market. So it's very easy to work that out. If there are 1,000,001 Dogecoin lottery tickets issued, and you win that award in Doge, then regardless of the fact that Doge went up or down yesterday, it's very clean from that standpoint. And presumably, going in that there's market volatility in Dogecoin, and that if you're participating in that market space, you would see whatever you purchased with as potentially volatile. I think the only time the volatility might come into play and when the Lottery Commission would need to be thoughtful is if you were purchasing into the lottery in a cryptocurrency and it was paying out in a different currency, fiat currency, for example, so you're receiving dollars, and so there would be a valuation change potentially of that portion of the pool. But even under that circumstance, that's exactly the kind of thing that, in my opinion, the lottery board would be very thoughtful of and would take that into consideration, that they've got a change in valuation, and if they don't convert the cryptocurrency they receive, then what they effectively have is a pool of fiat plus a pool of cryptocurrency that, again, that could be paid out in tandem, or you could have a reevaluation upon payment, which again would be something that's subject to rule. So even though there would be volatility in many cryptos that could be used to purchase or receive the funds, it doesn't fundamentally change or create additional risk in the lottery system itself, as I see it. I don't see a way where any of the consumers, any of the players, or the state, or the Lottery Commission would take on additional risk, take on additional liability, or really have any difference in the operation or the payment, except that it would be in cryptocurrency. I mean, it gets back to the car example, where you can win a car in a raffle or a lottery. That's reasonable. And the valuation of that asset does change. Now, it might not change as fast as some cryptocurrencies, but the value is not a certain thing. And then at the same time, obviously, you've got stable coins where realistically you could have a cryptocurrency where the change on one day, it might be worth $1.0005, and on the next day, it might be $0.99995. But very stable, depending on the interest of how the board wants to operate it. So, I appreciate the concern and the thought about this flexibility and the fluctuation, but I don't see that it adds any risk, provides any uncertainty for the consumer, or really leads to any bad outcomes, whether you're on the consumer side or the state side for it. So I don't know if that addresses any of those concerns. Mr. Kaufman has some.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I would just add to that, you brought up a great point that I failed to mention earlier, and that is a lot of the payment demand that the lottery is seeing is in stable token, just what you're mentioning. So there are those digital or virtual currencies, as we define, that don't change in value, that would stay stable in value. So this opens up that avenue as well. But what you said is absolutely right. The point of this isn't for the lottery to take arbitrage plays, right, fluctuating value. It's just meeting a demand to accept another form of payment that's variance driven, it's close to cash, but we currently don't allow for it. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe just to change the example I gave earlier from a car to gas for a year, some award like that. I don't think we have issues with commodities that have fluctuating values. So as long as it's denominated and the individual knows that the value is fluctuating relative to the dollar. I don't know that that's necessarily not protecting the purpose of that ticket.
I think isn't the first step, at least in theory here, if this is something that progresses, isn't the first step just trying to accept virtual currency to enter into a lottery? We're not even talking about the next step yet, which is the payout of the currency, which is what we're talking about now, but that's really not the vision at this point. That's probably a much further down the road vision, right, Mr. Kaufman? And it's probably a world where we are able to walk ourselves into that a lot more cautiously and work these different types of issues out. Right now, we're really, this legislation, what I imagine would be used for is simply allowing me to enter into the existing lottery and purchasing it with my Dogecoin. Yes. And the only thing I would add to that was it's not requiring it, it's just making it an option. So it's not being forced on anyone. It's just opening up another payment method. Or at least that.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify those, so as anybody listening is not confused, this legislation does provide the opportunity to pay for a lottery ticket in crypto, virtual currency, or receive funds. So it provides that statutorily, but yes, I believe there's going to be a stepwise process to get.
Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I do think I came up with an amendment. It would be a policy decision that would help solve the retailer issue of ambiguity, which would be only let retailers redeem cash prizes and not let them redeem virtual currency prizes, and leave the redemption of virtual currency prizes to the lottery corporation. So I'll have that whenever we have a motion.
Mr. Kaufman, just for what it's worth, I have no objection to that at all. If that's yeah, it is. Yeah, I don't think that's a problem.
And Mr. Chairman, I do think that the redemption of virtual currency would make it harder for retailers to figure out even how to do that, and it would just make it easier for the corporation to do that. So it should all be done digitally anyways. So.
I've seen a lot of hit nuts.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I can't imagine honestly that you really have a scenario. You would need to have a local retailer paying the crypto out from their account. I mean, the nature of this technology is such that direct transaction from the state to the payment holder, if it's in crypto as the payout, It's just facile. So yeah, I don't think that's a problem.
Does that help, do you think, Senator Murphy?
I'm still trying, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, okay, if cryptocurrency is purchasing the tickets on one day, it goes down in value before the state lottery redeems it, but yet they're paying back out in cash. Isn't the state absorbing that fluctuating value?
Mr. Kaufman?
Maybe. So yes, if the state lottery was gonna hold that money. But what we were referencing though is that virtual currency is gonna have to be custodied somewhere. Currently, how other companies are doing this is once they receive that payment, thankfully the digital asset markets are 24/7, so it's converted immediately. So it de-risks it for the state lottery. On the other aspect though, if it's paid in a stable token, it doesn't have to be converted immediately. It can be held in that stable token with the value.
And the conversion occurring automatically would also make sense. We would want that to happen anyway for that reason, but it would also stop the opposite from happening, which is some gaming of the system where it goes up and the lottery decides to cash in and gets the rich. Right? There would be two problems. I just can't see that happening. We wouldn't want to, we couldn't step in and have one way and not the other way. Can have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I do think my initial confusion was that I was worried that a winning ticket, someone could claim a winning cash ticket and then redeem it in virtual currency. And I don't think that's the case with this bill. I think the idea would be that you could offer a prize in virtual currency and then redeem it for virtual currency.
Correct.
Which I would assume the lottery corporation would be holding the virtual currency as a prize rather than holding cash and then converting it to virtual currency when the person redeems the prize. So yeah, I think I'm actually fine with the bill.
Okay, yeah, that's how.
Hopefully that clarifies it for Senator Murphy. So they wouldn't be redeeming a cash prize in virtual currency. They'd be redeeming a virtual currency prize in virtual currency.
Right. Any more than I can right now to ask for it in a certain payment method. It doesn't come out that way. I can't ask for it in any other commodity. I get it in the form that I enter into the lottery.
Question?
We don't really have a question. But Senator Nethercott moves the bill forward.
Yeah. Is public testimony closed?
Oh, sorry, public testimony, further public testimony. Closing public testimony. Motion on the bill. Second is by Senator Cost. And we don't need the amendment now. Or you do want the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think that Senator Nethercott moved it with an amendment, so I'll offer the amendment just for clarity's sake and for LSS sake. On page 2, line 18, after payment of, insert cash. And then on lines 19 and 20, strike new language. And then on page 3, line 1, add the word cash after pay, strike the new language on 1 and 2.
Yes. I'll second for discussion.
Representative Smith.
I apologize for blanking out there. Do you mind?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So page 2, line 18, after the word payment of, insert cash. So it says payment of cash prizes. And then on 19 and 20, strike new language. Page 3, on line 1, after the word pay, insert cash. So it says pay cash prizes, and then strike the new language on 1 and 2. And so that would allow for retailers to only redeem cash prizes and not redeem virtual currency prizes.
Mr. Chair. I'd also ask if you might include and give LSO leeway to make any other conforming amendments, because I'm not sure that those are the only places that would
I
need
will add that in my amendment,
Mr. Chairman.
we would have let him do it anyway, but that's.
It's good.
Okay.
Representative
Representative Stiff's puzzle look is now gone. It worried me at first. Representative Stiff is questioning it. I wanted to make sure.
Question on the amendment.
All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any other amendments?
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, yeah.
page 4, strike new language, paragraph G.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on that amendment? We talked about it earlier. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That amendment carries. Mr. Kaufman, was that what you were gonna do? Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, based on the need for the Speedy Bank and the fact that we don't quite know when that's going to be done, I think we should move this forward with no fixed date for when the rules should be promulgated, which means strike section 2 on pages 4 and 5. So I move to amend by striking section 2, page 4 and 5, and then I think I need to and conforming section 3, the effective date. I think section 3 is going to refer back to section 2. So, David.
So essentially, we're just be removing that entire section 2. And then, of course, for section 3, we wouldn't need the split effective date anymore. We just have.
Correct. It would be. So it would become section 2 with the uniform effective date of July 1st, 2022. And Mr. Chairman, there was some discussion about, and we could do this during the session and maybe move this forward now, but some sensitivity to getting an earlier enactment date. And I guess I'd just say, do we want the July 1st, 2022? Is this something we can contemplate later? And maybe we just amend it during session if we, through discussions, need to expedite this for some reason, but start with the July 1st, 2022 and we'll move on.
I guess, Mr. Chairman, it's completely permissible, so why not just move it forward? The board's not required to do anything other than begin. It doesn't even have to begin crafting rules and regs because it's completely permissible. So we don't put them at a disadvantage, do we, if we have it ready for us to go? Other than it looks pretty slick when we move it up during the session. But why not just do it?
Yeah. All right, Mr. Chairman. So I'll modify my proposed amendment to for our new section 2, which is the effective date, utilize the language of immediacy. So all acts necessary for a bill to become law as provided by Article 4, et cetera, that you see in paragraph B.
Okay. Moved by Senator Rothfuss, seconded by Representative Western. Any other discussion?
From a strategy, Mr. Chairman, from a strategy point of view, Chairman Senator Rothfuss and my fellow senators, do you think that that will create further trepidation concerning two difficult concepts within the legislature?
Chairman, so Senator, you mean the effective date, moving that up and expediting it?
I sense needing to explain this to the senator from Batesburg on the floor.
Fair.
So does it cause more harm than good, recognizing that the truth is the lottery probably wouldn't have anything out before July 1st, 2022 anyway?
Sure.
So keeping the bill as consistent with other legislation might be the wiser course. Because there's no benefit to removing the July 1st, 2022 date. So let's not create any
All right.
chopper blades when they don't exist.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Chairman, with permission of the second, good Representative Western over there, I'll revert to the July 1st, 2022 effective date as my motion.
And as usually happens, if everything is just along 1,000 miles an hour,
Yeah.
we'll change it.
We'll give it some thought.
We need to change it.
Question amendment?
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That amendment carries. Any other amendments?
Mr. Chairman, would you like, do you need, LSO, do you want an amendment to change the catch title?
You want a motion?
As you do it by motion. Why not?
I
Catch
thought it
title
was
from.
just a clerical error.
I move to change the catch title from cryptocurrency lottery to lottery amendments.
Second.
Question.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Further amendments?
Question on the bill, roll call.
Senator Murphy,
No.
Senator Cost,
Aye.
Senator Nethercott.
Aye.
Representative Stiff.
Aye.
Representative Western,
Aye.
Representative Ian,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Rothfuss,
Aye.
and Chairman Olson.
Aye.
That passed.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Real quick, just for those listening to clarification, we have members of our select committee that, based on the nature of a committee, when we're sponsoring legislation, legislators vote if it's sponsored legislation, but we cannot have gubernatorial appointees vote because that is a violation of separation of powers. So that's why we only had the legislators voting. We do obviously seek input as well as support from all of our members. And in the past, we had a task force which could not sponsor legislation. So this is a little bit different, but I wanted to make sure everybody understood why that vote took place the way it did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that clarification. All right, we have 30 minutes until lunch. I think what we can do is move, depending on who's here, I see who's here.
Just go to a long lunch because people are coming at 1:30 spots.
Well, for the second half, I was looking at the flared natural gas.
I think even that.
Just keep it all together.
Yeah,
And a long lunch.
a long lunch. As well as, Mr. Chairman, what's going on over at the hackathon right now? If anyone were to go over there, is there anything that folks could be going and checking out? Probably not yet.
Mr. Chairman, there is one of the startup challenges that is going on simultaneously. But I do not know the precise timing of that and whether they also have a lunch break scheduled. I apologize.
Well, it's a good opportunity for everyone to get together for lunch, have some conversations. Mischief.
All right, well, sensing I would have mutiny if I tried to move forward.
You can't be the only one sitting here, Mr. Chairman.
We will break for lunch. We will be back at 1:30 p.m.